Okay, so let's begin with this. When I was a kid, I loved to go to school. I don't remember we never be bored in school at the time. There was the magic of numbers and the magic of words, signs, and sounds. The first year of high school in France in 1940 I was interned with my mother in the concentration camp of Reclus near Mende. The pronunciation is possibly not good French. The pronunciation of Reclus, in any case. It was wartime, and we were foreigners and desirable, as we were dubbed. But the camp administration kept an eye on the kids in the camp. We came and left as we wished, rolling. I was the oldest and the only one to go to the high school for 5 kilometers away, whether it was snowing or windy, which my script shows that always got wetter. By the way, translation of mine. In the last years of the war, while my mother remained interned to the camp, I was in a children's home on the Secours Suisse for refugee children in Chambon-sur-Lignon. Most of us were Jews, and when we were warned by local police that there would be Gestapo raids, we did run and hide in the woods for a night or two in small groups of 2 or 3 without really realizing that our lives were at stake. Now, no more italics now, that's me. The passion and the magic of learning apparently can be stronger than a terrible environment and make it even possible to disregard it and its danger. It makes us live an interior life greatly independent of the material one. Grothendieck tells it as it were a quite natural thing. But what makes it the case in some of us and not in others? Is this a purely intellectual state, or is it rather also an affective state? Whatever it may be, is this a necessary condition for being mathematicians, or more genuinely intellectual? I leave you to reply. The gift of solitude, another quote. When I finally got in touch with the mathematical world in Paris, I ended up learning there that the work I had done in my corner with the means at hand when I was a university student in Montpellier was more or less what was well known to everybody under the name of Lebesgue measuring integral theorem. Yet looking back on those 3 years now, I realized that they were by no means wasted. Without even knowing it, I learned then in solitude what is the essence of being a mathematician, what no master can really teach. These years of solitude laid the foundation for a confidence that was never shaken. To put it in another way, I have learned in this crucial year to be alone. By this I mean to approach by my own life the thing I wanted to know, rather than to rely on the ideas and consensus expressed or tacit that would come to me from a more or less extended group of which I would feel a member. The most direct affiliation that I believe to recognize are present with mathematicians of the past is the one that links me to Évariste Galois. He was a more modest person. One of the reasons, surely, that contribute to giving me this feeling of an essential kinship is that Galois remained during his lifetime, as they did a century and a half later, a marginal in the official mathematical world. The proximity I'm speaking of is that of a certain naivety, of innocence. It is expressed by a propensity to look at things through one's own eyes, rather than through the cured glasses graciously offered by some human group, more or less invested with an authority. As we might also call it, this is the gift of solitude. Is mathematics a social or individual enterprise? What Grothendieck seems to suggest is that routine mathematics is social, but original or innovative mathematics is essentially individual. Better, it requires solitude. More than that, Grothendieck takes solitude to be not a contingent circumstance, but rather a cognitive gift. an innate posture of spirit. Grothendieck is not speaking of genius here, but what he says suggests that he's thinking of that. This makes him suggest that mathematical genius is the ability of taking advantage of the gift of solitude. I don't know whether it is true or not. I leave you to decide. Again, mathematical work. The mathematical work, as well as any creative work, all work of discovery, or at least any work which is dubbed intellectual, that which is done above all by the mind and by writing, is marked by the hatching out and the blossoming of a piece of understanding. The bolder Grothendieck, not mine, all of Grothendieck. I introduced no formattation. All of what you see is by Grothendieck. Accepted language, that is, of course, in Grothendieck is French. Understanding of the things that we are probing. But to take an example at the opposite end of the spectrum, the passion of love is also driving discovery. It opens us to acknowledge that carnal, which also renews itself, blossoms, forth, deepens. These two drives are much closer than we generally suspect, or that we are willing to admit to ourselves. So what I take from this, there are a lot of things to take from this passage, but I take only that. There is no mathematics without understanding. But understanding is both understanding of something that is previously given, is that a form of Platonism? I leave you to decide. And the sort of internal force, a drive, pulsion en français, toward discovery. There is sort of intentionality in phenomenological sense here. I leave you to decide. Another, history of science. What the role of history of science? Faced to the great myth of science, with capital S, please, the heroic Promethean myth into which writers and scientists have fallen and continue to fall, one more than another. Only historians, perhaps, sometimes resist. History of science, apparently, is the only antidote against a methodological version of vision of science. Again, on this same topic, most mathematicians are inclined to confine themselves to a conceptual framework, a universe that is fixed once for all, the one essentially that they found ready-made at the time they did their studies. How it has been built over generations, and how and why such and such tools have been designed and made. These are all questions that his eras don't dream of asking. It is the universe, the given in which one must live. Full stop. Something that seems large, but also familiar, and above all, immutable. So regardless whether this is true for most or only some mathematicians, the point here is that routine mathematics seems then to go together with lack of historical awareness, since historical awareness makes the non-ineluctability and non-immutability of the present framework clear. Now, we enter a little bit more in Grothendieck mathematics, as far as I can. Point of view, theme, and visions. But even more than towards new question, notion, and statement, my particular genius pushes me, this particular genius, pushes him towards faithful point of view, constantly leading me to introduce and develop entirely new themes. We will see what themes means for Grothendieck in a moment. The innumerable question, notion, and statement that I have introduced make sense for me only in the light of such a point of view, or to better say, they born from it spontaneously with the force of evidence. The fertile point of view are, in our art, the most powerful tools of discovery. They are the very eyes of mathematicians, which at once make us discover and recognize the unity in the multiplicity of what is discovered. Remark, the unity in the multiplicity. You will see that this will be a constant in all will follow. The S has nothing to do here. There are points of view which are broader than others and which alone give rise to and encompass a multitude of partial points of view. Such point of view can also be called rightly a great idea. By its own fecundity, such an idea gives birth to a teeming progeny of ideas which all inherit its fecundity, but most, if not all, of which are less far-reaching than the mother idea. Again, but taken as such, a point of view remains fragmentary. Even the point of view is fragmentary. It discloses a single aspect of the landscape or panorama among a multiplicity of other equally valuable and real. Only one complementary point of view on the same reality joins each other. When the eyes are multiplied, our thick penetrates further in the knowledge of the things. And it happens sometimes that a beam of converging point of view on the same vast landscape gives shape to a new thing, to a thing that surpasses each of the partial perspectives. This new thing might have dubbed vision. The vision unity, the already known point of view that embody it and it reveals others hitherto ignored. So, mathematics discovers, so this is the first point that I want to make, it does not invent. And innovative discoveries are discoveries of unities, or even better, unities of unities. A point of view units several questions, notions, and statements, but some points of view are larger than others, like great ideas, generate a progeny of subordinate point of view. They display what others have called germinal richness. One of the other is my friend and colleague Daniele Stupa, president of this university, that asked me to introduce this term because he liked it very much. So others have called the germinal richness, and this makes them engender a single team. For a single team, unify different point of view. Still, a point of view or team only disclose an aspect of the relevant place of unity, so still not unitary enough. Several distinct points of view or team shape a vision which unites them and the corresponding aspect within a single site. On the strength of the vision, the mathematicians discern new aspects that were beforehand ignored. More than being a unitary, mathematics advance them by unification. And unification does not only bring things together, but also reveal things. It works as a lens, then fine-tunes our sight without restricting, but rather enlarging the horizon. This is what Grothendieck seems to intend by foundation. This all, Fernando will tell me whether I'm right or not, because he's certainly much more expert than me on this. Foundation. Here is indeed what he wrote later. The part of my program on the scientific theme and its extension and ramification represents in itself the most extensive foundational work ever accomplished in the history of mathematics, modest man, and surely one of the most extensive in the history of science. Again, the question of the foundation of mathematics is not then from Grothendieck the same as the problem of providing some sort of internal or an external justification of it, but rather that of unifying it by providing new perspectives for its future unitary development. As obvious as this might appear to professional mathematicians, not to philosophers, it is quite worthwhile to notice it for philosophers and historians of mathematics and its philosophy, since it is opening quite a different perspective on what should count as the history and practice of foundation of mathematics. Now, this is foundation, but how to do it? Let's see, to enter a little bit more in Grothendieck's foundational program. I have the impression that in my work program, the twists are only matter of details, generally quickly spotted by my own care. They are simple misshapes along the way, of a purely local nature and without serious incidence on the validity of the essential intuition. But at the level of the idea and a great guiding intuition, it seemed to me that my work is free of any myth. My assurance has never failed in perceiving at each moment, if not the final end of my way, at least the most fertile available direction, leading straightforwardly toward the essential thing. I would like to be able to say the same myself. Now, among the new point of view that I myself developed in mathematics, there are 12 in retrospect that I would call big ideas. So these are the big ideas. I think that all of you know them, all of them, but perhaps it's interesting to remember the list. Topological tensor, products in nuclear spaces, continuous and discrete duality, the Riemann-Roch-Grothendieck yoga of K theory and its relationship to intersection theory, schemes, topos, et al. And L-dyadic cohomology, motifs, motivic Galois group, crystals, crystalline cohomology, yoga, and Ram and Ode coefficients, topological algebra, infinite stakes, derivation, cohomological formalism of topos as an inspiration for the new homotopy, I'm capable to pronounce it, homotopical algebra, moderate topology, the yoga of an abelian algebraic geometry and Galois Steckmuller theory, schematic or arithmetic point of view for regular polyhedra and or regular configuration. By the way, in organizing the conference, we try to have more or less, not all. I think that we fight with the last covered by the different interventions. So now, what is more important, this comment, these 12 major themes of my work are in a way isolated from one another. They are, in my opinion, part of a unity of spirit and purpose, present like a common and persistent background note through my written and unwritten work. They are all as if by a secret predestination contributing to the same symphony. They embody so many different points of view, all contributing to the same broad vision. Among these themes, the broader one by scope seemed to me to be that of topos, which provides the idea of a synthesis of algebraic geometry, topology, and arithmetic. I translate the large with broad. The broadest is the largest one. The broadest one for the extent of development of which it has given rise as of now, in 86, is the theme of schemes. And the opposite extreme, the first and the last, that I don't know how to come back, that are the nuclear spaces and the arithmetical vision of polyhedra. The last 12 theme appear to me as being of more modest significance than others. The deepest are that of motifs and the closely related one of the Abelian algebraic geometry and of the Galois Steckmuller yoga, concerning the powerfulness of the tools and of common use in various advanced sectors of research during the last decades. The ones of scheme and et al. L-dyadic cohomology appear to me as the worthiest. This should make the term Grothendieck's foundational program fully justified and in line with the previous description of what Grothendieck was thinking as foundation of mathematics. So now let's enter a little bit more in the topics. And this quote, possibly for some of you, is less significant for me, but being an historian of mathematics, in French, this quote, I was greatly surprised. Because it's Grothendieck that speaks, but it could be Euclid in fact. So there is really a strong similitude with 2,000 years of history. Traditionally, we distinguish three types of qualities or aspects of things in the universe that are the object of mathematical reflection. These are the number, the magnitude, and the form. We can also term them the arithmetic, the metric, and the geometric aspect of things. In most situations studied in mathematics, these three aspects are present simultaneously and in close interaction. However, more often than not, there is a marked predominance of one of the three. we might say that the number is apt of grasping the structure of discontinuous or discrete aggregates. Magnitude is instead the quality for by excellence susceptible of continuous variation. By this, it is apt to grasp continuous structures and phenomena. Historical point of view is even trivial, but this is exactly what makes it extraordinary. If it were not for the distinction between magnitude and form or analysis in geometry, this description would well adapt to ancient and early modern mathematics, provided the related number are from Grothendieck not real numbers, but the numbers termed natural integer, or at most the numbers such as fractional one, which are expressed with the help of this by operation of elementary nature, namely numbers that do not lend themselves like the real numbers to measure a quantity susceptible of continuous variation. Ancient Greek mathematics was marked by a separation between a theory of magnitude and a theory of numbers. A long-term foundational program in early modern enlightened mathematics, Descartes, Leibniz, Newton, Euler, Lagrange, D'Alembert, etc., 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 aimed at an advantageous unification of them. These and other subsequent remarks suggest that Grothendieck has been engaged in a similar program, in a new and innovative context. By far, the most relevant achievement of the early modern program was the emergence of a third unifying territory, that of analysis and its form. Grothendieck seems also to conform with this achievement, which makes his program as classical as possible. Classic in the sense of Greek classic. But again, despite his using a very common word in modern mathematics, structure, the perspective in which he followed this path is quite original, of course. So structures, what are structures for Grothendieck? What he says they are. Here, what he writes. If there is one thing in mathematics that since always, assumably, fascinated me more than any other, it's neither the number nor the magnitude, but always the form. And among the 1,001 phases that form closest to reveal itself to us, the one that has fascinated me more than any and continues to do so is the hidden structure of mathematical things. Notice that what Grothendieck is referring to are not, or at least not presented as theoretical structure, that is algebraic or putatively categorical one, categorical in theoretic sense, not the category, but structures of things themselves, immanent structure of the universe, structure that we have not defined, but rather to discover in these very things. This is as clear as possible in what follows. The structure of a thing is not something we can invent. We can only patiently update it, humbly get to know it, discover it. If there is inventiveness in this world, it is by no means to shape or build structure. The structures did not wait for us to be and to be exactly what they are, but it is to express these things as faithfully as we can. Thus, we are led to constantly invent the language. So we invented the language to describe structure, not the structure itself. Able to express more and more finally the intimate structure of the mathematical thing, and to build with the help of his language the theories which are supposed to give an account of what has been apprehended and seen. So also theory invented, but not the structure. Theory describes the structure. Theory is part of the language that we went to describe the structure. There is a continuous and interrupted back and forth movement between apprehension and expression of things. As language and theory are invented or constructed, structures are discovered and described. Okay, a little bit more. The new geometry. The task to be accomplished was of carrying out a new geometry, realizing the marriage of numbers of magnitude. Descartes would have said the same. This marriage also appears to be the final issue or aim, that is not clear, it's not completely clear to me, whether it is an issue or an aim of Grothendieck unification program. This vast unifying vision can be described as a new geometry. This is the one Kronecker dreamed of in the last century. In a footnote, Grothendieck confessed of only knowing Grothendieck dreams by hearsay. It is not clear to me, but perhaps to you it is not clear to me whether he really wanted to refer to the so-called Kronecker Jungentraum, that is to Hilbert's 12th problem about the abelian extension of an algebraic number field, or he was simply using Kronecker's name to decorate his own program with an historical reference. I leave you to decide. The following quotes should in any case make clear the nature of this program. While arithmetic appears as the science of discrete structures and analysis as the science of continuous structures, we might say that in the more than 2000 years in which it has existed, geometry has been straddling these two types of structure. For a long time, there was no real divorce between two geometry, one discrete, the other continuous. Rather, there were two different points of view in the investigation of the same geometric figures, one emphasizing discrete properties, and in particular numerical and combinatorial aspects, the other emphasizing continuous properties, such as position in the surrounding space or magnitude measured in terms of mutual distance of each point, etc. So now in historian mathematics that speaks, this is not a good description of what happened. In reality, sociality might be a backward projection of Gauss' approach on previous geometry. This description is usable shaping a methodological past to which it would be good to go back. Here is indeed as Grothendieck go ahead. It is at the end of the last century that a divorce appeared with the appearance and development of what was something called abstract algebraic geometry. It did not like. Roughly speaking, this consistency introduced for each prime number is not right. He likes, but it's not enough. We have to go much powerful. Roughly speaking, this consistency introducing for each prime number P, an algebraic geometry of characteristic P, inspired by the continuous model of the algebraic geometry narrated for the previous centuries, but in a context, however, which appears irreducibly discontinuous, discrete. One can consider that the new geometry is, before anything else, a synthesis, the new geometry, the one that you want to construct, is before anything else a synthesis between these two worlds, until then adjoining and closely interdependent, but yet separated. The arithmetical world in which live the so-called space without principle of continuity, and the world of continuous magnitude where live the spaces in the proper sense of the term. In the new vision, is to formally separate worlds become one. This is the vision of the arithmetical geometry. The two crucial key idea in the startups and development of the new geometry were that of schema and that of topos. So we came to it. But before entering the way these two notions of schema and topos are used by Grothendieck to shape his new arithmetical geometry, goes of course beyond the thematic limits of my patchwork of quotes and also my capacity, by the way. All that I can do is appealing to a few quotes to make us feel the unitary flatness of Grothendieck's use of this notion. Trying to suggest a general methodological background, that is another thing that I will try in the last part of my talk, a general methodological background in which it is applied seems to be embedded. The background I suggest is provided by the notion of conceptual recasting. This is in no way a Grothendieck's notion. It has been rather suggested to me in a completely different context by my friends and friends of many of you, Ken Mandels, and it is my view that it can be used to productively understand a crucial aspect of mathematical activity. I see Grothendieck's reconstruction of his own foundational program as an authoritative confirmation of the insight that is that mathematics very often advanced by recasting. I will try to explain it in a moment. But before, a quote. A quite perspicuous way to introduce this idea of recasting is the following quote by Grothendieck himself. It is this sort of measurement superstructure called the category of shapes, which will henceforth be considered as incarnating what is most essential to space. This is indeed lawful for the mathematical common sense, for it turns out that one can reconstitute from scratch a topological space in terms of associated category of shapes. Nothing else is required to be assured that we can now forget the initial space, to retain and use only the associated category, which will be considered the most adequate incarnation of the topological or spatial structure we are trying to express. As so often in mathematics, we have succeeded here thanks to the crucial idea of shift in expressing a certain notion, that of space in this case, in terms of another, that of category. Each time the discovery of such a translation of a notion in terms of another enriches our understanding of both notions by the unexpected confluence or the specific intuition that relate to either one or the other. It's just what Grothendieck calls here incarnation or translation, and some by means of the verb to express that I rather suggest to call recasting, since it's not properly a factual translation, insofar it involves a crucial shift. No, it is an expression, insofar as the shift is not a change of status, and it is no more an incarnation, insofar it is not just a question of adding flesh where there is nothing but spirit. It is rather a question of transforming a flesh in another flesh by conserving an intellectual content while regarding it otherwise within a new conceptual stance, which connect this content to others and did not go with it in other that did not go with it in the previous stance. So a new configuration of content. This is just what makes understanding increase. The disclosure of a new form of presentation going together with a new configuration of content. This is exactly what I like to call recasting. My claim is that mathematics often and crucially advanced by recasting, and that this is just the purpose of Grothendieck's foundational program. The way Grothendieck goes ahead in his description confirms his reading. Thus, a situation of ethological nature incarnated in a given space is translated, I would say recast, into a situation of an algebraic nature incarnated in a category. Or if one wishes, the continuum incarnated in space in translated or expressed, or in my language, recast, through the structure of category of an algebraic nature, and until then perceived as having an essentially discontinuous or discrete nature. But here there is more. The notion of space had appeared to us as a sort of maximal notion, a notion so general already, it's hard to imagine how to find an extension of it that remains reasonable. Grothendieck seems to say, but when you speak of space, you are right at the bottom. We have nothing else to go. We have no deeper things. No, we can go. We can go forward. On the other hand, this category on which we follow, starting from topological space, are of a very particular nature. A new style of space, or topos, generalizing the traditional category topological space, will be described simply as a category which, without necessarily coming from an ordinary space, nevertheless, has all those good properties of such a category of shapes. Schema topos, in this context, what they do. Let us come back now quickly to the role of the notion of schema in focus. First, that of schema. This is the 2 in the 12 that I choose. Possibly I should have chosen other, but with schema of topos, more or less I can orient myself. With motive, for example, I could understand nothing. Therefore, I could not do it. The notion of schema is the most natural one for encompassing in a single notion the infinite series of notions of algebraic variety. Moreover, one and the same scheme give rise to a well-determined algebraic variety of characteristic P for each prime number P, The collection of these different varieties of the different characteristics can then be visualized as a kind of infinite sum of variety, eventile, an eventile. The scheme is this magic fund. It provides an efficient principle of passage to link together varieties belonging to geometry that until then had appeared as more or less isolated. Now they're included in a common geometry, and linked by it. One might call it the schematic geometry, the first draft of that arithmetical geometry into which it was to blossom in the following years. That of topos, then. Each of these geometry remained, however, essentially discrete or discontinuous in nature, in contrast to the traditional geometry inherited from the past century, going back to Euclid. What was still missing was clearly some new principle which would make it possible to link this geometrical object or variety of schema to the usual spaces. The essentially innovative idea was that of abelian sheaf. Abelian should have been capital A, sorry. On a space to which Leray associated sequences of corresponding homological groups. By the way, Leray is one of the very few names of mathematicians that are made in these 100 pages. If I remember well, the only two others modern mathematicians that are named are, of course, Chevalier, good friends of Grothendieck, and Bourbaki. But there was a quote about Bourbaki that I eliminated. It's very, very, very critical. Very, very critical. Say essentially that all what Bourbaki made is to unify things that was already there without no new idea. And while in the beginning of this unification was a sort of progress in the expression of things, then become a canon that strict things and forbidden progress. So it's very, very negative judgment about Bourbaki. So Leray and Chevalier are essentially only two modern mathematicians that he quoted in positive way. Okay, came back. The point of view for Leray, but by the way, quite comprehensively, that he quote Leray and Chevalier. Chevalier for personal reason, Leray for mathematical reason. What is surprising that he does not quote others. That's another thing. The point of view and the language of shapes introduced by Leray led us to look at spaces and varieties of all kinds in a new light. They did not touch, however, the very notion of space. But it turned out that this notion of space is inadequate to account for the most essential topological invariance. For the expected marriage of numbers and magnitude, it was like a narrow bed where only one of the few poses could at best find a place. The new principle that remained to be found was nothing but a spacious bed that was missing to the few poses. This double bed appeared within the idea of topos. This idea embraces in a common topological intuition both the traditional topological space embodying the world of continuous magnitude and the so-called space of variety of abstract algebraic geometries, as well as innumerable other types of structures. My use of the previous quote, aiming at introducing the notion of recasting, might have hidden a much more relevant aspect of this same quote, not this one, the last one that I used for the recasting. That is Grothendieck's claim of having offered a new form of presentation for the notion of space. This claim is much more explicit in Grothendieck's comparison of his contribution to mathematics and Einstein's one to physics. Also, Einstein quoted as an example of another science. Both work, Grothendieck Einstein, are accomplished under cover of a mutation of the conception we have of space, and both take the form of unifying vision, embracing a vast multitude of phenomena and situations that until then had appeared separate from another. So Einstein unified the notion of physical space, I unified the notion, he unified the notion of mathematical, geometrical space, mathematical space better. so you say also of arithmetical space. My work has been that of a mathematician driven by his very particular genius to constantly enlarge the arsenal of notion at the very basis of his knowledge. One point for not French. Grothendieck was not modest, of course, but the word genius in French has a less. It does not mean necessarily the genius, it's simply the capacity, the intellect. So in this case, they use my particular genius, does not mean my big, extraordinary genius. Okay, my work has been that of a mathematician driven by this very particular genius to constantly enlarge the arsenal of notion at the very basis of his art. This is how I was led to upset the most fundamental among all the notions available to the geometer, that of space, that is to say, our conception of the very place where geometric beings lives. So in the end of the story, this is what Grothendieck say to have done. To upset the notion of space. Two final questions now. Stop with Grothendieck. Now Marco Panza for the final 3 slides. There are much more notable things in Grothendieck's promenade, including a more comprehensive account of his achievement, going beyond the notion of scheme and topos, but I cannot stop my patchwork here for question of time, but all space, but also personal capacity. But still, not my question. Since before concluding, I'd like to ask 2 questions to a so qualified audience, the former much more local than the latter. The first question is this. Grothendieck's main achievement make use of a category theoretical setting. More than that, his claims when offered a new form of presentation for the very notion of space depends on the idea that topological space is recast by the category shifts. What I'm wondering is then this. Is this an essential feature or rather an accidental covering of this achievement? In other terms, would it be possible to do, essentially speaking, Grothendieck's mathematics without category theory? I have no way implicitly given an answer. I really, personally, do not know. I have no the mathematical capacity even to try to answer. But it seemed to me a nice question to be presented. The second question is a little bit more philosophical. It's not only more global, but also much more provocative. Even for some colleague working category theory to say the category theory could be eliminated is already a big provocation. But okay, it's even more provocative question. Grothendieck's mathematics as it were, a highly conceptual mathematics. It crucially depends on shaping a new notion, great ideas and visions, allowing to constitute a systematic conceptual setting as much general as unified and unifying, and overall mathematically pure as linear possible and free for any local freak of life. What I'm wondering is then this. Is this the sort of mathematics that is really practiced today in the largest part of the mathematical community? Is this, so to say, the style and approach of today's mathematicians? And is this the sort of mathematics that really satisfy not only our needs of technological application, that's not my point, but also our thirst for knowledge of most of modern mathematicians? Do we not assist today to a sort of split, so to say, between a more Eulerian and less Dedecidian, Hilbertian, Grothendieck'ian mathematics, almost a contraposition of a mathematics made of calculation, local solution, approximation, experimentation, trials and error, and another one seeking a more general theorem and that particular result? The first one is what I call the Eulerian, the second one is what I call Grothendieck'ian, between others. This is far from being a plea for such another, less aristocratic and more plebeian mathematics, which would be, by the way, possibly able to develop without the contemporary advance of a most general Grothendieck'ian level. It is really a genuine question. And if the answer is positive, That is, if there is reality split. I leave you to decide whether it is the case that we have to complain or to rejoice. In my quality of philosopher and an historian of mathematics, what I can do is not judging mathematics, but only try to understand its intellectual and epistemic nature. Thank you very much for your attention.